Welcome to Revelation Unraveled. I'm your host, William Tapley, also known as the third eagle of the apocalypse and the co-prophet of these end times. I came across another very interesting article in LifeSite News over the weekend, and quite a few people have already commented on this on YouTube, but I thought I would give you my spin because they really don't tell you the significance. And here is the headline and the title, and I'll show you this picture of Pope Benedict because he made a very interesting statement at the funeral of one of the four dubia cardinals, and he very subtly criticized Pope Francis, who I call Cardinal Bergoglio. And the headline is, breaking, Pope Benedict XVI says church is on the verge of capsizing. And he chose that word capsizing because he is talking about the bark of Peter. In other words, the Catholic Church as a boat headed up by the Pope. And therefore he is specifically criticizing Pope Francis, although in a, as I say, a very subtle way. And by the way, don't you think Pope Francis looks very healthy there? And I looked up another picture of him, and here is Pope Francis and Pope Benedict. Now don't tell me that Pope Benedict is not in perfectly good health. I mean, he is an older person, but I really don't see why he resigned, except I believe the Lord told him to resign. In other words, the Lord told him to respond to the pressure put upon his office, and now we do not deserve any better. And Almighty God appointed Francis just as he will appoint the Antichrist. So here goes this article, and this is by Claire Chrétien. She's a very good writer, very good looking, by the way, too. Pope Benedict XVI sent a sobering message at the funeral of Cardinal Messner today, saying he was moved at the dubia cardinal's ability. In other words, he's praising one of these four dubia cardinals. They wrote a letter of doubt to Pope Francis, asking him to explain what he meant in Amoris Laetitia when he said there were possible times in which Holy Communion could be given to people living in mortal sin. And of course, he has not responded. The cardinal's ability to live out a deep conviction that the Lord does not abandon his church even when the boat has taken on so much water as to be on the verge of capsizing. And of course, this is prophesied in the book of Revelation, chapter 11, verse number 2, where the holy city, and the holy city in the end times of Rome, is being trampled underfoot by the Gentiles. And Mary prophesied it at La Salette, where she said Rome would lose the faith and become the seat of the Antichrist. And this interesting article continues, and I'll put a link to it below. The church stands in particularly pressing need of convincing shepherds who can resist the dictatorship of the spirit of the age. Well, Pope Francis goes along with the spirit of the age. And who live and think the faith with determination, Pope Benedict said in a message read by Archbishop George Ganswein, his personal secretary and head of the papal household. Because of this pressing need, Messner found it difficult to leave his post. What moved me all the more was that in the last period of his life, now this is Pope Benedict speaking, he learned to let go and to live out a deep conviction that the Lord does not abandon his church even when the boat has taken on so much water as to be on the verge of capsizing, the Pope Emeritus concluded. As I say, we have two popes in the Vatican. They both have the title of pope. They both dress like popes. They both carry out papal duties. But the church teaches there can only be one true pope. One is true, the other is false. And this is a test from Almighty God so that we determine who is true and who is false. Messner, who was 83, was one of the four cardinals who sent Pope Francis a dubia consisting of 5 questions, asking if Amoris Laetitia is aligned with Catholic morality. He died while awaiting the Pope's response. Although Pope Francis hasn't answered the dubia, of course not, he has given his approval to interpretations of the controversial exhortation that say those living in adulterous unions may receive Holy Communion. And in fact, the bishops on Malta say people living in fornication who are not married, either a first, second, or third time, they can receive Holy Communion. And of course, as I have explained before, and none of these conservative sites are going to explain the problem, that invalidates the Eucharist. Jesus will not enter into the bread and wine consecrated by a priest if his intention and the intention of the church is to give Holy Communion to those living in mortal sin. And the Eucharist is not valid in Germany. It's not valid in Malta. It is valid in Poland because the bishops in Poland have publicly disavowed Pope Francis. And that is what your priest and my priest must also do if he wants his consecrations to be valid. Pope Benedict also mentioned in his statement that he had spoken to Cardinal Messner on the telephone the day before his death. That's interesting. Canon lawyer Kurt Martin said Pope Benedict's message was an amazing yet diplomatic form of support for the dubia cardinals. And it was also a rebuke of Pope Francis. As I say, that's why he said the church is in the danger of capsizing. That's a naval term, and it refers to the bark of Peter. It was an underhanded attack, in my opinion, on the current Pope Francis, even though Pope Benedict supports him, and he does that because he knows that Francis was appointed by Almighty God, and God is also going to appoint the Antichrist, and the reason is because none of us, Catholics, Protestants, and anyone else, we do not deserve anyone better. And as always, if you would like to know more information about my ministry here on YouTube, visit my thirdeaglemedia.com website.